so my mic's working. We're good? I'm actually going to invite my panelists come up because I wouldn't be complete without them. Welcome. So as we're getting started, there's a couple questions I actually want to ask you guys so we can get a bit of a lay of the land, which is, who here has been in the Metaverse? Okay. Who here has a crypto wallet? Nice, not bad. Who here has purchased an NFT? Has anyone played play-to-earn games? Okay, really interesting.
Yeah.
Great. So the reason why I call this panel Society the Spectacle is because it relates to a writer, Guy Debord, and he was talking about marketing and the idea that we have so many inputs around us about what we're supposed to expect or feel when we see things, that how do we know what is right or what's true, what's real? And it feels like we're at the same point with the Metaverse and Web3 and crypto. So today I'm very lucky to have three amazing panelists from across the worlds of gaming, live events, and music metaverse, and we're going to get down to the truth of what this means today. So I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves. And Marisol, would you like to begin?
Yeah, I'm Marisol Segal. I work at AEG Presents. I head up digital partnerships, so AEG Presents is one of the two largest live entertainment companies in the world. We own festivals like Coachella and hundreds of venues and do a bunch of tours and things that are awesome if you like live music. My background is over 15 years in sort of the music tech space, working with artists and labels, content, marketing, and product is sort of where I straddle. And I've spent a lot of time up in the Bay Area, and I miss it, but I live in LA now. That's me.
Vicky?
My name is Vicki Nauman, and I run a consultancy called Cross Border Works that sits largely in between the music and the tech industries. Most of what I do is work with technology companies who want to do something meaningful with music, and I help them navigate, figure out a product and a business model. I work with companies like Beat Saber. I do all the music licensing for them. AIM Lab, some early stage companies, Spotify, Downtown Music, and I'm very bullish about everything with Web3. I think there's huge opportunities, and I'm excited to have this conversation.
Hi, my name's Danny Tran. I'm an investor at Convoy Ventures. We're an early stage VC that is 100% focused on investing in the gaming industry. Some of our investments, Ready Player Me, Sky Mavis, which is Axie Infinity, Game Fam, and a handful of companies that are here. Prior to Convoy, I worked for Activision Blizzard on their corporate strategy and business development team, and then before that I was a consultant at McKinsey.
Awesome. And then my background, so I'm the CEO and founder of Wristband. We're a metaverse experience platform where creators can meet their fans, monetize their work, and benefit from the creator and ownership economy with Web3. So basically, if you think of Grand Theft Auto minus all the drugs, violence, and shooting. But yeah, so I want to start too with a definition of fandom, but not in the sense of fandom is, but to understand what it means and hear from the gaming, music, and metaverse worlds. I want to hear an experience from each of our panelists about how they felt that sense of fandom and one of the experiences.
What does fandom mean? I mean, I think in general, it's just a feeling passionate, really passionate about something. And, when I think about what fandom means for me and experiences, going to a music festival is a really great example of feeling that passion, and having that sort of aha moment of walking on the grounds for the first time and going through all the experiences and being with your friends and having community and having memories that you take away with you that you don't forget. That really, to me, is really a great, that's the feeling. It's the feeling.
Thank you.
Yeah, similar for me. I think when I look at my life and I think of things that have made a huge impact on me that have stayed with me for a long time, they're things that I had kind of anticipated, but my brain wasn't able to truly grasp what that experience was. And so, like the first time I went to Burning Man, people had told me what it was like, and then I was riding my bike around in the middle of the night, and I was like, I don't know what this is. I love it, and it made an indelible mark. Same thing with like the first time, for all of you who are of a younger generation, Before we had digital, we could only hear songs on the radio and then wait until the CDs were available to buy. And I remember when I heard Nirvana Nevermind for the first time, I had heard 1 or 2 songs and I listened to that whole album. And I still, every time I listen to the album, I go back to that moment. And it makes a really, really long-standing impact on me. And then it's like, fandom, it just becomes something that is now a part of me.
My very first game was Pokemon Yellow. Got it when I was like 5 years old. And I've owned every single Pokemon game ever since, and even now when there's a new game that's about to come out, I book PTO for it. I'm like, don't call me, don't email me for the next 72 hours. And I just play that game, right? And I know that as I'm going through that experience, it's mostly a solo experience, but when I hop online and I'm having these conversations about a boss that I haven't been able to beat, or a Pokemon on my team that I always have on my team and I have no idea where they are, and has a 2% catch rate, and I'm trying to find it, I know that I can go online and find that community, and so that's what fandom means to me, is being able to access that.
Yeah, these stories you hear now, if you make a platform or an experience, and this is what you hear, you've done a great job. We're all trying to create experiences. Often you go into a platform and you go there and you're like, what am I supposed to do? Or what am I supposed to feel? So you have this history of game design and world building, or the ritual around live events that you just don't get into a lot of these platforms, because you have the economics, you have the mechanics, but then you've forgotten about this core thing, which is fandom and excitement and social experience and engagement. And I think this is where the core value is for people, but also for business. So that's kind of the foundation of, again, what we're going to cover a bit today. So I'm going to ask questions specifically to each of our panelists, and then we're going to ask broader questions where we'll all participate, and then we're going to open up to the floor. So for Marisol, for AEG, we have tickets, we have festivals, we have live events, you have booking, promotions. So when we're looking at the business models in real life, what is your approach to the metaverse to extend this opportunity for AEG?
In the end, our core focus is being a live entertainment company. That's always going to be first and foremost, and serving the fan. Like we just talked about, that's what we do every day, creating IRL events, right? And I think, from a strategic perspective, looking at this stuff, it's not about a replacement, which a lot of people, I hear that debate a lot, and it's I'm not looking to replace anything. It's a complement to what's happening in the real world. So, whether it's being able to drive awareness or extend reach to fans that cannot come to an event, or creating a completely new experience so that they can more deeply connect with maybe one of our festival properties, that's really, from a strategic perspective, and the approach that we take. But knowing that it's still very early, and that these are all explorations for something that is going to happen in the future and get bigger, but we're all just sort of kind of trying to see where that's headed first. We still have, a business and, a lot of fans to serve, and a lot of artists that are going to play live all around the world.
Yeah, and I think all of this is, again, built on the foundation of creators who create the content for us to consume and enjoy and experience. So every single model must look after the creators, but often they're also the bottom of that pile. And this is what's really exciting about the ownership economy, is that artists can actually have true ownership of that asset, whether it's digital of a song, the music rights can be tracked a lot easier. This whole new model that around the live entertainment, also the fan engagement experience throughout the lifetime or duration of that artist's career. So again, there's a new window of opportunity here in Web3, and how's that evolving how you think about the fan relationship and that business mechanic or model?
I think that there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in Web3, and it's very Wild Westy right now, and it feels kind of like Web 1.0, but with actual real technology and opportunities to execute some of this stuff. And it's super exciting. The innovation in the conversations that I'm having are very different than sort of what's been going on for a number of years in kind of the Web 2.0 world. I think that I look at this opportunity as new ways to innovate in existing forms of things that we're doing, like loyalty as a great example, and driving community, which are foundationally what you expect to have in an artist fan environment or in a festival. And so, again, exploration and almost serving maybe like a real super fan at sort of the top of the super fan pyramid that really wants to engage in all of this stuff so that we can actually like do some exploration and try and learn from this as we grow and see what it's going to become. But it's definitely not something that I would look to replace all of our existing structures. It's still early days, but it's pretty fun to play around, and I'm excited that we've been able to do that.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the super fans. So I know with our early prototype events, we had smaller bands and artists that we worked with, and we had like there's super fans and like one guy was from the Philippines. He was getting up really early in the morning, and we had like a guy in Argentina who was like going like later during his night, and they were like down for anything. If there was a bug, like they would wait 10 minutes, and they would like just be hyped to be a part of the whole chaos taking place, and. Yeah, so I think this is like a great ground to experiment. Again, having that right audience who's willing to experiment with you is really fun. We also like, another thing I think is so spot on with what you say is that Metaverse is never going to replace live. And the way, like we talked earlier, that you're setting up festivals more of an experience and more of like a real world metaverse in a sense. So bridging this gap between the real and the metaverse, like where do you see, again, like the experience similarities and like are there things we can take from the real world that you think are super key to embracing in the metaverse?
I mean, let's use the festival example. I know we were talking about that earlier. It's not just about going to the festival because of the artist lineup and that's all you're doing. You're going there for the whole experience. It's like there's culture and community. Maybe you have friends, maybe you're meeting people there that you've never met because you're connecting. There's activations, there's experiential stuff, there's art. Like it's a big world, right? And I think that a lot of what's happening in the metaverse is very similar to that. And I think what's truly important about the metaverse experiences is actually creating that engagement. And you kind of have to work harder at it in a digital environment, I think, than a physical environment. But a lot of the things that we're doing in the physical world are about really creating that engagement. We just have a little bit of an easier time because it's tangible and it's kind of in your face. And it's easy for people to just step in and not know what they're doing yet. And I think part of that, too, with the metaverse is really trying to figure out, the UI, UX is super important and making it easier for people who aren't that savvy yet to be able to step in and it will get there, but because that's the real difference right now between like a real environment that's tangible and something in the digital space.
Yeah, certainly they're two completely different things with some similar audiences, but also very different ways of experience it. So they require two different approaches. Copying and pasting something from the real world, it's going to be probably really boring to stand your avatar in front of a little JPEG on your screen, which like even minimizes what you're seeing. So there's I think here, this is something actually Vicky would be great to ask because you consult for a lot of companies across tech and music. You also work with a lot of startups. You kind of champion music rights in the metaverse space. So from you, when we're creating these experiences online, we're talking about friction and like ease of use and like bringing this cultural phenomena that like creates the like era-defining moments in our like society and lives. How are we seeing like the challenges there, and how are you solving those challenges for your clients?
Yeah, every time there's a new technology that comes into, usually crashes into the music industry, I always really try to take a 5,000-foot view and look at it and think, okay, what is this technology bringing to the table? And are there behaviors that we already know that fans and artists already have adopted? And a good example of a technology that I was really enthusiastic about that didn't end up really having much application to music was when wearables were first coming out, because there just wasn't that much of an application. There were some innovative things, but ultimately it ended up migrating into the things that we know now around fitness. But with everything in the web, in Web3, which I include crypto, blockchain, fractionalization of rights, immersive experiences, virtual worlds, all of those things have so many different pieces that are fundamentally great for music and music fans around collectability, around fan clubs, experiences, people gathering, social aspects. And so there are, these are all things that we know people love, but it's a new set of technologies. So how can we enable that? And one of the things that's really great right now about everything that's coming up with Web3, when you were talking about experimentation, is in all of these experiences, they're very artist-centric. You don't need 60 million songs. You don't need 10,000 songs. And in Web 2, things are very catalog-centric, where you need catalogs of music in order to create a value proposition to the end user in Spotify-like services. And so we have a moment and a period of time when we can experiment. And in the Web 2 world, there was almost no room for experimentation, because in order to license rights on the sound recording side from the labels, publishing from all of the publishers, and then performance rights, you had to build this entire stack of contracts and technology to be able to even launch. And then you've licensed a model, and you have to live with that model. So there was no room to really experiment, except maybe small features in your user experience. But with Web 3, we have a tremendous opportunity to let artists experiment. And artists are always the ones that will adopt technology. The music industry itself is very slow. It's like a big oil tanker. It makes huge wide turns, and there's all the startups and the speedboats around it. But with artists, they move quickly, and the artists that can control their own rights and have good label and publishing relationships and maybe work to bring those rights into Web 3, they're definitely at an advantage.
I actually want to say something there, because as we talked about sort of the kind of fandom aspect and creator, it's like Web3 it's so creator focused in a way that Web 2.0 like has some of that but doesn't. And I think that that's just, it's such a massive shift, I think, in who is really going to drive everything, and how important the fan experience is for this versus that, because of the fact that it is really creator driven.
But one of the problems that we're having right now is a lot of the companies that are building out in Web 3, they are building, it's really an extension of the creator economy that we've been building over the last few years, moving into Web 3. And so a lot of musical artists are being lumped in with other kinds of creators. And this is a huge flaw in the thinking, because if you're creating an NFT, or if you are a YouTuber and you are a creator, I mean, we're all creators of some sort, you can move very nimbly. And if you're a young artist and you control your sound recording and your publishing rights, you can spin up all sorts of experiences in Web 3. But virtually all of the artists who are of significant merit, they have labels, they have managers, they have agents, they have up to 10 writers and 10 different publishers on every song. And so they can't move nimbly. They have an entire ecosystem around every song that's protecting their intellectual property. And so some of the Metaverse platforms are just making an assumption that, yes, we're building creator tools into our platform, and we want creators to come and engage directly. But what they're not realizing is that an artist who's a performer is probably not going to be bringing their publishing and all of these other rights to the table. They're just not going to do it. And so, there's a gap there around who's responsible for those rights, and then what are the liabilities associated with those rights. In the US, we have $150,000 per stream statutory damages on the publishing side. And so these things are real risks that we're in an experimental mode right now, and these are things that are artist-led, so labels and publishers are probably not going to sue their artists, but we need to get these things sorted out so that everyone can get paid properly, and that we can get smart contracts and get all of the rights sorted out. But we need a bridge between the industry as we have it now and in that world. And just as a closing example, I did a project with Warner Music and David Guetta's team for Roblox, and he was doing a DJ set as an avatar, 20 songs, and those 20 songs had 143 publishing shares. And so I had to go and harmonize all 143 of the publishers, as well as all of the owners of the master recordings, and get everybody to agree to all of the same terms so that we could do this. And it took like three very painful months. And there was a certain point in the process where I thought, I'm going to just bird dog every single share and every single approval. And some of these writers were not even registered in any systems, and so I tracked them down on social media. And that is completely unsustainable in a Web3 world. That is not going to work. And I did it partially to just do the entire process start to finish, and dotting every I and crossing every T as an example of how poorly the traditional music industry is set up for everything Web3.
There's a lot of great insights in there. I think often that the history of music is the history of tech. We have a lot of tech of the times, from like synthesizers to now all these widgets and tools and plugins you have to make music on your computer really changes how music sounds over time. And similarly, you have like the history of tech being the history of music, where the platforms and toolkits influence the sound that we hear throughout each generation. I think we're also talking a lot about how here we're seeing a new generation of creators, which artists are often becoming lumped into a group with, that are creating a new era of interactive entertainment on the blockchain and on Web3, which is changing the landscape and the roles of all their teams and the roles of how you track the music rights and making it easier, solving a lot of the problems. But then something else you said that's really interesting is that a lot of the Metaverse platforms aren't thinking about it in the context of the music industry, which does have a very entrenched way and processes of doing things. So when we think about the role of a creator, if they're going to focus on their craft, at a certain point in their career, they actually need a team to help them manage to build the brand partnerships, to book a tour, to help with the logistics of that tour. So it's really important that these platforms can actually house these teams and structures that exist within the entertainment industry. And I think this is something that Vicky is playing a big role of driving forward as we're going from the current era of like the legacy and your David Guettas. People still want to hear and play a super important role, while also enabling this new generation of creators who are entering these Metaverse platforms and actually creating in those platforms too. And Danny, so from gaming and from fandom, from even live experiences, identity plays such an important role in all of these. Mm-hmm. And we see lots of platforms look very different. Mm-hmm. And how this embraces the culture and fan experience. What role do you see this playing in terms of enabling fandom in the metaverse, and then also that drives business models too?
Mm-hmm. I think fandom and identity, I think there's such a one-to-one relationship there. I think everything that you do to signal that you're a part of a certain fandom is reflective of who you are, right? And I think that's why gaming is such a great medium for identity. And I think that's because I think gaming allows just for different interpretations, and it provides context for a lot of these interactions that just doesn't exist in things like social media. And that extends beyond just things that are in game, right? I mean, it's who you interact with on Twitch, it's who you participate in Discord channels for. And sorry, can you repeat the last part of your question?
Yeah, and how I guess identity in the whether it's t-shirts or fashion or avatar creation tools, how that plays into business models that we see emerging within different game environments and metaverse environments.
Yeah, I think this is something that I'm really excited to see Ready Player Me and other similar avatar platforms build out. I think we've had a lot of conversations around interoperable assets over the past 12 months, but in terms of practicality, that hasn't really necessarily come to fruition. And so I think as these platforms arise and integrate with more and more metaverses, more and more platforms, more business models will arise where you can be a creator, you can upload certain assets to these marketplaces, and they can be available across all of these experiences and avatars.
Yeah.
And I think talking about the business models, that's so important too, because in addition to experimenting over the next few years on what these user experiences are and where the technology can take us, it's also a really, really great opportunity to figure out new business models for music, because you don't have to read very deep into the news to see that the Spotify model, which is a volume-based model, that if your music gets streamed millions and millions and millions and millions of times, you will make a lot of money. And if you are a niche artist or you're someone that your music is just not something that people listen to on repeat, but they love you, that Spotify model does not work very well. But in in the Web3 world, it isn't about volume, and it isn't about having tens of millions of fans. You can really monetize your work and your art, and you can support yourself with a small collection of really, really loyal fans. And that is super exciting, and that's a brand new business model for artists.
I think at the same time as we're seeing opportunity, the fans are also telling us what works and what doesn't. So I know there's quite a bit of backlash, both from, music fans and from gaming audiences. When there suddenly is an NFT in their game, they're like, why is this here? So I think, Danny, I'd love some insight into the reason why that backlash is happening, and then why companies are trying to implement, NFTs and blockchain because of the future opportunity.
Yeah. I think to be super frank, I think most gamers see that as a cash grab, and I think that ultimately is because the way that at least most publicly they've been designed is it doesn't ultimately serve the gamer, and it doesn't really benefit the type of experience that they want to have. And so when it comes to why companies are doing it, I think honestly, I think it just needs to happen. I think it's just it's a bridge, right? It's these companies are testing this technology, they're testing receptions to it. And ultimately, gamers gamers are one of the most vocal groups, right? We will go to Twitter, we will tweet exactly what we want from this type of technology. But if you look back when free-to-play and freemium models were first arising, this same backlash happened. No one wanted to see wanted to watch ads even if the game was free, right? And I think this is just the adjustment period that needs to happen in order for us to really cross that bridge and actually have a system that works for gamers.
Mm-hmm. We also have this huge hype and craze around play-to-earn games. I think after Axie Infinity, it's all the world can think of in one sense is how can I leverage this new type of game? But we also see a lot of the audience there is coming from Eastern Asia, and that is there's a very different perception around that when you look at Western culture as well. And you said something really interesting about geography and design of the games and why it's currently in this geography when it could also be a part of the Western culture and player.
Yeah, I think what I was saying earlier is we're really early right now, and I think what we're seeing with this geographic focus is really just a product of how the game is designed, right? Right now, people can earn a living by playing these games, and so that's going to appeal to groups that want to have that type of experience. And the people usually in the West don't necessarily need to have that type of experience. But more recently than Axie Infinity, I think Steppen has been a pretty topical point of conversation, at least with most of my peers here in the U.S. And that is a game that a majority of their audience is actually in the West, which is really interesting. And so I think kind of what I was alluding to earlier is as these game models continue to mature, and the primary reason why people want to have these experiences and want to come to these platforms is not the earning, it's the playing, I think we'll definitely see a diversification there in geography.
Yeah, especially in the role of indie artists, the whole thing when you go and discover that first artist, or you go to gallery and discover this is alluding to the whole NFT emerging art scene now, is you buy their first art piece, and then in 10 or 20 years, because their career has evolved, that art piece might go up in value. So I think this is something that's really interesting with social tokens as well. The fact that when you're a new artist in a platform, you can get 100 social tokens, and then, or maybe even 10, and as soon as those 10 tokens are bought, then they're a new wave is released. So the fact that people go and they invest in these early independent creators, that's almost everyone has the role of an A&R, or everyone has the role of an artist, a curator, and it's saying, this is what our culture is really interested in, or this is what my community is really interested in, because it's all about shared values. And DAOs are now playing a role in this too, but it's very interesting to see sometimes they're very independent of games that are happening, but do we see examples of DAOs being integrated in existing games and structures that are really supporting the creator community?
Yes, I think that's pretty common actually, mostly in like guild type structures where there's DAOs that vote to purchase a certain percentage of assets in a certain game because they see the potential of that game in the future, because they have a really supportive game economy. So yeah, in short, yes.
Awesome. Okay, and I want to open it up. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I want to open up a couple questions for everyone to kind of participate in. And I think when we're looking at like NFTs and fandom as well, there's been some great examples of like things that have immediate reward, but that NFT, unless it's burned, like kind of lasts a lifetime. So what are the ways that you can keep a fan engaged and reward them for their engagement with an NFT? We saw like the Kings of Leon, like front seat tickets for life. But what are other examples that we're seeing taking place that are new in terms of the fan engagement and relationship?
I mean, I think, what we've been doing with festivals, I mean, what we did with Coachella, what we did recently with Hangout Festival, and what we're sort of exploring is, testing out the technology to kind of reward benefits, but really tied to the on-site experience, and kind of starting to try and build. I talked about that sort of super fan. Like, I mean, we know a lot, especially in a festival. Like, we know who purchased tickets. We know what people are doing on site. Like, there's RFID technology and all sorts of stuff that already exists. That, but people who are just kind of that extra level engaged in this new technology is sort of a new thing that we would have never known before, and it's been interesting to start to explore and actually to see how interested people are in even trying it, even though they may not even know what it means yet. And part of that is because we're pairing it with something that's familiar to them, like a dedicated entry lane. If you redeem this NFT, maybe you can go into a dedicated entry lane to get into a festival. If you redeem this NFT, maybe you might get a rare one that's going to win you a backstage tour. Or something of that nature, and kind of trying to pair familiar with this new technology to kind of introduce the people who are most interested in trying things, to get them in so we can maybe start to build a community and then start to explore and test things out with them.
Yeah. And I think for everyone here, or probably most people here today, are they're part of a tech company or a startup, or perhaps they're investors as well, or part of a gaming company. And for all of this comes communication. So a lot of the time, and I often like to use the example of Snap, is that they never talked about augmented reality. They talked about filters or photos or moments. And how are you advising basically your company, or like what experience have you had around marketing, and where have you seen the success?
We talked about this earlier. I mean, I think that, we can't forget marketing. And we can't forget that we are largely talking to audiences of people that aren't super savvy, and that we are introducing new concepts to and trying to pair that with familiar concepts so that we can kind of see who wants to come on the ride. But, just trying to be a little less stodgy and being a little more fun, which is what we're doing with everything else. So I think digital collectibles or digital keepsakes, or, not saying everything's a commemorative NFT as an example, which is like not something we would ever use in the real world marketing. And really just trying to adapt it as well, and thinking about what the strategy is for the existing brand or IP or artist or whoever, and how you already talk to fans, and not trying to just bolt this on, but figuring out how to integrate this and kind of using that existing communication to do that, which isn't happening a lot right now. That's, the UX, UI, the messaging, all of that sort of needs to get a little more fun, I think.
Did you want to add to that?
Well, I think one of the big challenges that we have is you need, if you're an artist and you want to do an NFT or you want to do some sort of project, you have to sell your team on it. And so you have, excuse me, you usually have a finance director, you might have a CEO, you might have a manager, you might have a music publisher and a label if you're doing something with the sound recording. And a lot of artists are really having a hard time. And I was part of a project where we were putting together a bundle of goods that included a sound recording. And ultimately, the whole thing fell apart because the publisher just said, I don't want a wallet. Why would I want a wallet? And I don't want a smart contract. I don't want any of that. I mean, you can do whatever you want, but then you have to pay me in advance, and you have to pay me all of this money up front. And, and it ultimately just became something that we could not get all the parties around the table to agree to use the technology as it was intended. And so, it does become you could technically do it, but if you're reselling the NFT and if you're doing other kinds of things, you want to leverage the smart contracts and you want to leverage the technology, and fully go into this world. And sometimes you just can't get everybody on board.
I mean, I do think that we talk about innovation, we talk about this new, really kind of targeted, group of people who are excited to try out new things. And I think that also goes for thinking about the artists or the creators or whoever you're involved with, and really, people who are also excited about trying new things and not kind of trying to shove like a square peg in a round hole, so to speak, because it is still early and we are still learning. And so you really want people who are interested in going on that ride. Yeah. And it does get hard when you have like big brands, who want to kind of get in the game because it's like a money grab or something like that, and then Vicky ends up having crazy conversations. But I think that it's all about trying to collectively find the group of people who want to innovate.
Yeah, I see we have a couple questions. I've got a couple more, but I'm also going to open it up to our audience because we're here for them today.
Yeah.
So yeah, please.
Hi, this is super interesting. Thank you. I'm Sultan Sharif. I'm with MIT Reality Hack. My background is in film. I worked in distribution pipelines, between Sundance and independent theaters. So what you're speaking to, is it's funny. I was just about to ask a question, and you kind of answered half of it. And so, because I'm looking part of what you're describing, like the David Guetta 20-song example, that's the perfect thing that an NFT could solve, easily, and you don't need 3 months to do it. And so what I've been trying to think about is because I also look at 3D assets. So we're moving into a moment. It's more companies are doing their films in VR, even indie films now, making them in VR. And it's you make these 3D assets, you spend $100,000, the movie comes out, you do nothing with the asset, right? And that could be making money for you if it was on Unity, et cetera. So I'm curious, what do you think is the touch point for those companies? Is it coming through the agency? Is it coming through the publisher at the top end? Because I feel when you do interact directly with someone's agent, manager, et cetera, that's not the touch point, because it's not their job to think about the risk mitigation of a new thing, but it is someone's job in the company to be thinking about how they're impacted by this new industry. So I'm curious, have you seen any examples of technology directly addressing business models, and then the companies that are adopting them? Is it working somewhere?
I think it is, and I mean most of the successes that I have seen to date in Web3 are artist-led initiatives. And when you're an artist, if you're there's a kind of a pulling apart of the industry, music, where there's independent artists, they own everything, they can do whatever they want. But if you're an established artist, if you want to do something, it's really your agent and your manager's job and your label and your publisher's job to enable it. And so, the artists are really leading the forefront, and they, the only way that I have seen this industry change is when artists demand it, when artists know what to ask for in their contracts, when they know what to sign and what not to sign, and, to strike out all of the Web3 things so that, your label doesn't have control over everything. And I think what we're going to start to see is, bigger artists that are leaving their labels and they're leaving their old sound recordings behind on their label and they're going independent. And I know several of them right now that are in the process of this, of leaving their major label deals specifically because of Web3. And in that world, put it on the blockchain, put those rights on there and have the permanence of metadata, because we have these, terrible problems where we have a machine-to-machine world and we can't get our unique identifiers right. But it's going to be artist-led, and it's going to be the companies, innovative companies, that are empowering and enabling those artists. But I think we'll have these two different ecosystems where we will have, we'll have the traditional industry, and we will have artists in this new world, and it'll be a Venn diagram. If they're in the Web3 world and everything's on the blockchain, they still need to get distributed in Spotify, so they have to have a traditional mechanism around them as well.
Thank you. That's great to know more about. I think on that too, I know one thing that my startup is navigating is we have all these incredible potential partners, one of them being Ready Player Me, whose avatars we love. But if we're thinking about the business model for creators, if we have avatars that's taking 50% of the merch revenue, it's our duty to find a different solution or to make our own solution where the artists can actually keep 90% or more of the revenue from those digital goods that they sell. So we have, again, this other complex stack where you have lots of, like, you have like your percentage on the payment system, you have a percentage on the merch system, you have a percentage on your networking system. So really, when we're thinking about building the infrastructure to house this new creator economy, you have to think about what partners are involved and how does that affect the model and the creator at the end of the day. Because if we're going to have, you think of all the TikTok creators creating amazing content, all the Spotify artists, as soon as there's a platform that exists that solves the problem where these creators being fairly monetized, you might suddenly find TikTok a lot emptier than it is today. So I think this is a really exciting challenge, and we have this convergence of technologies from motion capture to networking solutions, avatar solutions, reality capture. They're going to create an incredible opportunity that's starting today. Are there any other questions from the audience? I think, yeah, we've got a couple. Come on up to the mic, actually.
Good job.
Oh.
Sorry, I'll be brief. So just at the intersection of this idea of a live spectacle, I know you guys have been talking about music and artists and all that, but I'd love to hear any thoughts you guys have about esports, since that seems to be part of this whole next wave, and there's plenty of spectacle involved.
Sorry, what specifically was your question? Like, just like thoughts on esports, or this, like, yeah, I missed that.
Yeah, well, for example, Marisol, you're in AEG. You guys put on lots of live events, including sporting events. I'd love to hear any experience you have with that. I don't know, you're a gaming investor. Maybe you've invested in esports in some way or shape or form. Not sure what your experience would be, sorry, but if you have any, I'd love to hear it as well.
I mean, I don't have a tremendous amount of experience in esports, but I find it doesn't feel surprising to me in any way that it is what it is. I mean, it's gaming really, and it's competition, and you can look at something like Twitch is a great example of how popular that is. And so I think bringing that to a live experience, those events are hugely popular, and they're also very local. And then they can become national or international, and I think that's actually it's league-based. So I think it's taking the sports model into gaming and sort of merging them. But in the end of the day, I think there's a lot of things we can look at from gaming that is adapted into what music is doing and everything else. A lot of a lot of things that gaming has done really well has bled into other areas. So esports is a great example of sort of converging sports and gaming together.
And I think actually esports is an area within gaming where there's a lot of learning to do from areas outside of gaming. I think for the gamers in the room, it's not really a surprise that esports has a monetization problem. And so as we think about esports, reaching the same maturity as traditional sports, as other forms of entertainment, I think that there is a lot of learning and maturity that needs to happen with those business models.
Yeah, I also love Miles' massively interactive live events, where you have this really cool thing of suddenly all the audience becomes a part of the experience, and they're influencing what characters do, or how artists perform, or how a RPG unfolds within a game. So we're seeing almost a turnaround from a couple people and a big audience to a huge audience influencing a smaller field, and then you can have different teams around that model as well. And I think the economics of Miles are fascinating. We had one more question, I think, the last question today, coming up.
Hi, I am a technical artist. I have my own micro label and my micro projects. 2 years ago, I created this project that basically, I created my own 3D gallery in the Metaverse with multiple people joining, etc. And I would love to demo it to you eventually if you want to give me feedback. My question is more in the context of distribution models in a more decentralized environments. Now, you touched base on catalog-centric, platform-centric, and for us creators, this is a huge hope that basically we're trying to cover the huge void that is between us and the statistical thousands of people that might love our creations, but it's super difficult to reach. I know that statistically out of 8 billion people, there might be, 20,000 people that will love my stuff, but it's very difficult to reach them. So do you have any suggestion for eventually all the creators here to how to eventually reach that very, very long tail, and if the decentralized Web 3.0 will help us to do so? Thank you.
Well, I have an example. So my startup Wristband, we launched our alpha at South by Southwest. And as a new platform, we also have the thing of we have artists that want mass audiences, but we're new platforms, we need to attract the mass audiences. But because we launched at South by Southwest, so we made a partnership with a real world festival, we were able to have that built-in audience that a lot of people who couldn't go to the physical event were really excited to come online. We ended up having super rare and wearable, so to the bigger NFT marketplaces, shout out our open call for content. So we had thousands of visual artists, multimedia artists, music artists, NFT artists apply. And at the end, we were able to feature 81 within our virtual platform and also have a quest that there's a never released before track that was hidden within Wristband that people had 10 minutes to go and find, and if they shared it on social media, then they could download the track. Their band manager would send them a code to download it on Bandcamp. And in the real world, they had this live VR experience at a 100-cap venue, but they had the show every 30 or 40 minutes. So throughout the night, there's, I think 2,500 people showed up. Not everyone got in, but it was this really cool way of artists coming together in a new platform, leveraging relationship with a live event to bring a greater audience to both the online platform, but also to the real world experience.
And the one thing I would add is I always look at, do we have things like this in the past, and how did small creators start to surface? And what happened in the first wave of the internet was there were all these disconnected websites, and then we started to see blogs, and we started to see aggregators who were pulling information in and organizing information for end users. Same thing with music. There were all these musicians who were independent musicians and small, and they were just floating around, and then aggregators popped up, and then they started sweeping them in and simplifying, standardizing. And so I would imagine that is probably a similar pattern that will happen in Web3, because I think we'll have millions and millions of metaverses.
Yeah.
And we will have to have organizing structures, and we'll have to have ways of surfacing things that are, if you like this one, you might like that one.
I think that's going to be one of the big challenges, because it from a existing Web 2.0 world where everything, to decentralization, but then sort of having to kind of rely on some of these old ways of thinking. And I think you can already see all the fragmentation. You can go and build this experience in this one place, but that one place doesn't have very many people, so how are you going to reach all the people? Really, you'd like to distribute that thing to a whole bunch of places, which is not that different than taking your music and making sure it's on every streaming platform so that you can get a little bit of your fans everywhere. And so I think that that's going to be an interesting push-pull that we're going to move into as we start to develop.
And just last note, I think something that is going to make it easier is I think those that are building in Web3 are building for the decentralization of data. And so there is not a single entity, a single platform that is going to collect all that data and just hold it, right? Mm-hmm. Most things, most transactions, most interactions, if they're on chain, are going to be trackable. And so I think from the early stage company point of view of what I'm seeing, there are already companies that are looking to aggregate that data and make that available to people.
That's probably one of the most exciting things about what the blockchain can do.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much to your incredible panelists today. I know we have another session, so if you guys want to speak, we'll all be outside. And do you want to wrap up with any closing thoughts? Or?
You know what I would love to see for a live event? If I'm trying to find my friends, if they could shoot a virtual flare gun in the crowd.
AR.
You have smart groups.
Drop a
set
pin.
up
When is that going to happen?
Right, and also bathroom lines and where to get drinks quicker.
Why that's not happening yet? Because
Why?
Mobile connectivity is still not great when you have 150,000 people on
T-Mobile is here. You should set up a.
No matter how many times they optimize, we're still not quite there yet. But it's moving really fast, so maybe this time next year.
Well, thank you, Anne, Marisol, Danny, and Vicky. Great job.
A round of applause
so much.
for our panelists. Thanks, guys.